Ursula's cave, it seemed much less likely that the empty house would be haunted. When they had measured the attic, they had to get the pencil and do a sum. They got both different answers to it at first, and even when they agreed, I'm not sure they got it right. They were in a hurry to start the exploration. We must make a sound, said Polly, as they climbed it again behind the cistern. Because it was such an important occasion, they took a candle each. Polly had a good store in her cave. It was very dark and dusty and draughty, and they stepped rafter to rafter without a word, except when they whispered to one another. Opposite your attic now, and this must be halfway through our house. And either of them stumbled, and the candles didn't go out, and at last they came what seemed like a little door in the brick on their right. There was no bolt or handle on this side of it, of course, for the front door, for the door had been made for getting in, not for getting out. But there was a catch, as there often is on the inside of a cupboard door, which they felt sure wouldn't be able to turn. Shall I? Said Dickory. I'm game if you are, said Polly. Just as she had before, both felt it was becoming very serious, but neither of them drew back. Dickory brushed round the catch with some difficulty. The door swung open, and the sudden daylight made them blink. Then, with a great shock, they saw that they were looking not into a deserted attic, but into a furnished one. But it seemed empty enough. It was dead silent. Polly's curiosity got the better of her. She blew out a candle and stepped into the strange room, making no more noise than a mouse. It was shaped, of course, like an attic, but furnished like a sitting room. Every bit of the walls was lined with shelves, and every bit of the shelves was full of books. A fire was burning in the grate. Remember that it was a very cold, wet summer that year. And in front of the fireplace, with its back towards them, was a high-backed armchair. Between the chair and Polly, and filling most of the middle of the room, was a big table piled with all sorts of things. Painted books, and books of the sort you'd write in, and ink bottles and pens and sealing wax and a microscope. But what she noticed first was a bright red wooden tray with a number of rings on it. They were in pairs, a yellow one and a green one together. There was a little space, and then another yellow one and another green one. They were no bigger than ordinary rings, and no one could help noticing that between them they were so bright. They were the most beautiful, shiny little things that you could ever imagine. If Polly had been very little younger, she would have wanted to put them in her mouth. The room was so quiet that you would have noticed the ticking of the clock at once, and yet she now found it was not absolutely quiet either. There was a very, very faint humming sound. If a hoover's been invented in those days, Polly would have thought it was the sound of a hoover being worked a long way off, several rooms away and several floors below. But it was nicer than that, and more musical tone, only so faint that you could partly hear it. It's all right, there's no one here, said Polly over her shoulder to Dickory. She was speaking above a lisp now, and Dickory came out, blinking and looking extremely dirty, and indeed Polly was too. This is no good, he said. It's not an empty house at all. We'd better think before anyone comes. What do you think those are? Said Polly, pointing at the coloured rings. Oh, come on, said Dickory. rest